Hello students. So today we will see NCERT chapter 8, which is aldehyde, ketone and carboxylic acid exercise questions. So today we are going to solve question 12.1, 12.2, 12.13, 12.6 and 12.13. This is the disclaimer. So let's begin with the question. So first question which we are going to see is NCERT question 112.1. So first let us see what is this question saying. So it is asked what is meant by the following terms, and you have to give an example of the reaction in each case. First is cyanohydrin and another one is acetyl. Now let's see the solution part. So first let us define what is cyanohydrin. So cyanohydrin is an organic compound where the same carbon atom has both a cyano group, which is a CN, and a hydroxyl group, which is OH, attached to it. That means same carbon will have one CN group and one OH group. So here if you see at this given diagram, this shows you cyanohydrin. So you can see to this carbon, a hydroxyl group is attached and a cyano group is attached. So this is called cyanohydrin. Now let's talk about cyanohydrin's formation. So the typical reactants, they are carbonyl compound like an aldehyde, or it can be a ketone, and hydrogen cyanide, which is HCN. So when this carbonyl compound and hydrogen cyanide react, they produce cyanohydrin. Now let us look at the reaction scheme. So this will show step-by-step process of how a carbonyl compound, it reacts with hydrogen cyanide to form cyanohydrin. So if you see over here at this reaction, here you will see hydrogen cyanide, which is HCN. It reacts with a base and it forms cyanide ions and water. Okay, so you see over here that this reaction is a reversible reaction. Now what happens in this reaction? A base, it is often used to help the hydrogen cyanide break apart into H plus and Cn minus ions. Okay, so the Cn minus ions is what actually attacks the carbonyl carbon, which leads to the formation of cyanohydrin. Okay, so this Cn minus ions, this is what attacks the carbonyl carbon, which finally leads to the formation of cyanohydrin. Now continuing with this, here you see a reaction scheme for forming cyanohydrin. Okay, so you see over here a carbonyl compound. When it reacts with cyanide ions, this gives you a tetrahedral intermediate. Okay, and which further forms a cyanohydrin. So one by one, let us see how this mechanism proceeds. So we will look at the reaction scheme in more detail, so it will give you a better picture. So first let us see what happens that this Cn minus ion or cyanide ion, this attacks the carbon atom of the carbonyl group. So this is the carbonyl group, and the Cn minus ion, this attacks the carbon of the carbonyl group. If you see the charge on this carbon is partially positive, which is a good target for a nucleophile to attack. So when the Cn minus attacks on this carbonyl carbon, the pi bonds in this carbonyl breaks and the tetrahedral intermediate is formed. Okay, so if you see this pi bond between carbon and oxygen breaks and this tetrahedral intermediate forms. That is, to this carbon a O minus group and a cyanide, which is a CN group, is attached. Now next what happens, the intermediate which is formed here, this picks up a hydrogen ion, that is H plus, from hydrogen cyanide, and this step stabilizes the intermediate and we move to a product which is cyanohydrin. Okay, so this is the final product which is formed. So if you see over here in cyanohydrin, so this molecule is called cyanohydrin because it has both OH group and a CN group which is attached to same carbon. Okay, so this is how from a carbonyl compound, when you attack it with CN minus ions or cyanide ions, you get cyanohydrin. So we can say that a cyanohydrin is a compound with both an OH and a CN group which is attached on the same carbon. Okay, is it clear? Now moving on to the next part, which is the acetyl part. So if you see over here, this is a representation of how acetyl looks like. Okay. So if you see here an acetyl, it is an organic compound where two alkoxy group, which is these OR groups, they are attached to the same carbon. Okay, so two alkoxy groups, they are attached to the same carbon. So this is the structural feature that defines acetyls. So it is important to note over here that this central carbon, it was originally the carbonyl carbon. If you see, then this central carbon, it was originally the carbonyl carbon. So I can say the carbon that now holds the two OR groups or the alkoxy group, it was previously double bonded to oxygen in the starting aldehyde molecule. Now to form an acetyl, we need three things. First, we need an aldehyde, we need an alcohol, and we need an acid catalyst. So this acid catalyst, it helps you to speed up the reaction. Okay, so this combination is essential for the acetyl formation. Now let us look at the overall reaction scheme. So if you see over here, this is a detailed reaction scheme which shows how from a aldehyde you get an acetyl. Okay, so if you see aldehyde, it reacts with two molecules of alcohol with the acid catalyst present to finally produce an acetyl and water as a byproduct. Okay, so if you see starting we have a aldehyde. When this aldehyde reacts with one molecule of alcohol in the presence of acid catalyst, you get a hemiacetal. Okay, in hemiacetal, one OR group, that is one alkoxy group, and one hydroxy group is attached to the same carbon. And further, when this hemiacetal reacts with another molecule of alcohol in presence of acid catalyst, then you get an acetyl. And in acetyl, two alkoxy group are attached to the same carbon and water is released as a byproduct. Now one by one we will see this mechanism, that how we get hemiacetal and finally acetyl. So first we will see how from an aldehyde we get an hemiacetal. So we will discuss the mechanism for forming an acetyl. So what is happening in step 1? The acid catalyst, it donates a proton to the oxygen atom of the aldehyde group. So this acid catalyst, this donates a proton to this oxygen atom of an aldehyde group. So you will see this oxygen now gets a positive charge. It has get it protonated. So what this makes the difference is that this makes the carbonyl carbon more electrophilic. Okay, so if this gets more electrophilic, it is more likely to attract the electrons. Okay, so in first step, the acid catalyst, it protonates the oxygen of aldehyde group. In the next step, the lone pair of electrons on the oxygen atom of alcohol, it attacks the carbonyl carbon. So this alcohol, okay, in which this oxygen has lone pairs, it attacks this carbonyl carbon, and you see a new bond is formed between the alcohol and the carbonyl carbon. So this is the carbonyl carbon, and you see this is an oxygen of alcohol. So this is a new bond which is formed between the carbon and the oxygen, between the carbonyl carbon and the alcohol. Okay, so if you see over here, this alcohol, it acts as a nucleophile in this step. And finally, in step 3, the alcohol, after this alcohol attacks the carbonyl carbon, in step 3, the proton is lost, which is results in the formation of a hemiacetal. Okay, so if you see, this oxygen is positively charged over here, so there is loss of one proton, and finally you get a hemiacetal. That is, to this carbon a OH group and a OR group is attached. Okay, so this hemiacetal is the intermediate which will finally lead us to the product, which is acetal. Now we will see that how from a hemiacetal we get a acetal. Okay, so let us talk about the mechanism. Now what happens in next step, the hydroxy group of hemiacetal gets protonated. So this is the hydroxy group of hemiacetal. This gets protonated. This means a hydrogen ion, that is the H plus, is added to the oxygen atom. Now what happens when this oxygen gets protonated? It makes it a better leaving group. Okay, so now this group can leave easily. So now in step 5, this involves the elimination of water from the molecule. Okay, so when the protonated hydroxy group, it leaves that water, it creates an unstable and highly reactive oxonium ion. So as you see, this gets protonated and this leaves as a water molecule, and finally you get an oxonium ion which is highly reactive and unstable. Now in next step, an alcohol molecule, this is an alcohol molecule, this adds to the oxonium ion. Okay, so this addition is a key to forming a acetal structure. So the alcohol, it attacks the positively charged carbonyl carbon, which creates a new bond. Okay, and you see we get this structure. And finally what happens in next step, the molecule, it loses a proton to form the stable acetal. Okay, so this oxygen is now positively charged, so it will lose a proton to finally give us a stable structure, which is the acetal structure. Okay, so to this carbon, 2 alkoxy groups are attached. So this is how from a carbonyl group, first when it reacts with one molecule of alcohol in presence of acid catalyst, we get hemiacetal, and when hemiacetal further reacts with another molecule of alcohol in presence of an acid catalyst, then we get an acetal. Okay, so to sum up, I can say forming an acetal, it involves protonation, elimination of water, addition of alcohol, and loss of proton. So I hope this question is clear. Now we will see the next question. In next question, it is asked to name the following compounds according to IUPAC system of nomenclature. So 3 parts are given to you. You have to name these compounds and you have to follow the IUPAC nomenclature. Okay, so let's solve the first part. So this is the molecular formula, that is CH3CH, CH3, CH2, CH2, CHO. Now notice the presence of a CHO group at the end. What does this indicate? Now you all must be familiar that this CHO group is an aldehyde group. So now we can represent it in a more convenient way. So this is how we can represent this, okay? That is, to this carbon, a CH3 group is attached, and at the end we have an aldehyde group. Now let us see the general format for writing the IUPAC name. So the secondary prefix plus primary prefix plus word root plus primary suffix and then secondary suffix. So this is the general format of how we write a general IUPAC name. So now, by following this order, we will write the IUPAC name of this structure. So first, see over here, I have selected a longest carbon chain and have numbered that longest carbon chain. So this is the longest carbon chain, and I have numbered it in such a way that this carbonyl carbon gets the least number. That is, it gets the first number. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now let's see the IUPAC name. So first is the secondary prefix. So secondary prefix over here, it indicates the substituents or the special groups which is attached to the parent chain. So if this is the parent chain, then you can see at fourth carbon a methyl group is attached. So this is a secondary prefix. 4-methyl is the secondary prefix. Then comes the primary prefix. So this usually indicates the nature of parent chain, okay, whether it is cyclic or acyclic. So for open chain, we write no prefix. For cyclic compounds, cyclo is used. So here you can see there is an open chain, so that is why there is no primary prefix. Next, we will see the word root. So word root, it is the longest continuous chain, and here in this chain we have 5 carbons. So if we have 5 carbons, the root word is pent. Next, the primary suffix, it tells us the types of bonds between the carbons. Okay, so we see over here we have all single bonds. So for that we use the suffix ane. Okay, that is ANE. And finally we come to secondary suffix, which indicates the main functional group. So here we have an aldehyde group. Okay, so for aldehyde group, I told you when you are writing the name of an aldehyde group, the E of an alkane is replaced by Al. Okay, so this is how you write the IUPAC nomenclature. So when you will put it all together, you will get 4-methyl pentanal. That is, on fourth carbon, a methyl group is attached. Okay, and this contains 5 carbon chain, so the root word is pent. And since we have an aldehyde group, so E of this pentane is replaced by Al. So this is 4-methyl pentanal. So whenever two vowels it appear consecutively in the IUPAC nomenclature, generally the E is removed. Okay, for example, if you see ane, like suppose you can take pentane. So if pentane, E is also in vowel and A is also in vowel. Okay, so if two continuous vowels are coming, we generally remove this E. Okay, and we write it as ANAL. Now continuing with the second part. Now we see we have another molecular formula, which is CH3CH2 COCH C2H5 CH2CH2Cl. So we will start by identifying the main functional group and the longest carbon chain. Okay, and see the different groups that are attached to this chain. So we can represent this. Okay, so you can see over here we have this C double bond O over here. On this carbon a ethyl group is attached, and also to this carbon a chlorine is attached. Now let us see the general IUPAC name. First is secondary prefix, then the primary prefix, then the word root, which is followed by the primary suffix, and then secondary suffix. Okay, so we follow this general format. So now let us see the IUPAC nomenclature. So first we have identified the longest carbon chain. So this is the longest carbon chain. And you see over here, I have done numbering in such a way that this carbonyl carbon gets the least number possible. So if I would have started the numbering from here, from this carbon, then see 1, 2, 3, 4. Then this would have gotten fourth number. But if we are doing numbering from this side, that is 1, 2 and 3, okay, then you see that this carbonyl carbon gets a third number. Okay. So we will now see the IUPAC nomenclature. So we will see that first. We will talk about secondary prefix. So this is the names and the position of the substituents that are attached to the main chain. So if you see over here in this compound, we have a chloro group which is attached at the 6th carbon, and we have an ethyl group which is attached at the 4th carbon. Okay, so if I talk about secondary prefix, then this is 6 chloro, 4 ethyl. This is the secondary prefix. Next, we have the primary prefix. So here we have no primary prefix because it is an open chain structure. So there is no primary prefix. Then comes the word root. So this tells us the number of carbon atoms in the main chain. So if you see the longest carbon chain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 has 6 carbon atoms. So the root word will be hex. Now comes the primary suffix, which indicates the type of carbon-carbon bonds. So since all the bonds are single, so we use ane as the primary suffix. Next, the secondary suffix. So if you see the main functional group over here, so you will see a ketone on the 3rd carbon. Okay, so there is a keto group at the 3rd position, at the 3rd carbon. So secondary suffix will be 3 on. So this 3 indicates the position of this functional group. So when you will put it all together, you will get the IUPAC name as 6 chloro, 4 ethyl, hexane 3 on. Hexane 3 on. You will see over here that this E of hexane is replaced by ONE. Okay, why? Again, because if 2 vowels appear consecutively, then generally we remove E. Okay, so if you see over here, the E of hexane is replaced by ONE. So it is ANONE. Okay, so if you'll see over here, this E is replaced by ONE over here. Okay, so you will see it is ANONE, and this 3 indicates the position of the carbonyl group. Okay, now let's move on to the next part. Next part, if you see, we have CH3, CH, double bond CH, CHO. So we can represent this in a more better way. That is how. That is like this. Okay. So if you see over here, we have again an aldehyde group which is present. And now we have also a double bond which is present. So the general IUPAC format again is same. Secondary prefix, primary prefix, word root, primary suffix and secondary suffix. Okay. So it is very important to know this general IUPAC format. Now first we will see the longest carbon chain. Okay. So see, this is my longest carbon chain. And I will do numbering in such a way that this functional group gets the least number. Okay. So this will be 1, 2, 3, 4. Now first we will see secondary prefix. So if you'll see, there is no secondary prefix over here. Okay, because there is no group or substituent group which is attached to this main carbon chain. Next we have primary prefix. So there is also no primary prefix because you can see this is a acyclic compound. Next we have the word root. So word root is the longest continuous carbon chain. Here we have 4 carbon atoms, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the root word will be but. Okay, this is the root word. Next, we have the primary suffix, which tells us about the types of bond present. So if we carefully see over here, we have a double bond which is present starting at the second carbon. So if you'll see at this carbon, we have a double bond. So the primary suffix will be 2-ene. Okay. Next, we have the secondary suffix, which indicates the main functional group. Since we have an aldehyde group at the first carbon, so we will write secondary suffix as 1-al, 1-ul. Okay. Now, when you will put it all together, you will get but-2-ene 1-ul. Okay. So that is the E of butene is replaced by Al, and this 1 represents the position of the aldehyde group. And this 2 over here is the primary suffix, which is 2-en, which tells you that a double bond is present. Okay. So again, when two vowels appear consecutively, generally E is removed. Okay. So if you see over here in butene, the E is removed and replaced by Al. So this is ANAL. Okay. So I hope this is clear now. Now we will see next question. You have to draw the structures of the following compound. Earlier you have to write the names. Now you have to draw the structures. So first is 3-methyl-butanol and second is 4-chloropent-2-on. Now students, I hope by seeing these names, you are able to identify what functional groups are present. So this Al over here clearly indicates an aldehyde group is present. And this 2-on over here, that is ONE, clearly indicates that a ketone group must be present. Okay. So I hope this is clear by now. So if we have to draw the chemical structures, we have to follow the general IUPAC format. Okay. So first you have to identify the parent chain. So this means finding the longest continuous chain of carbon atoms or the main ring if it is a cyclic compound. So the parent chain, it forms the backbone of the molecule and everything else is built around it. Next, you have to number the carbon chain. So we start numbering from the end that gives the functional group the lowest possible number. Okay, so numbering is crucial because it tells where to place the substituents and the functional groups. Next, step 3 is to identify the functional groups. For example, an aldehyde group, it is written as CHO. And a ketone group, there is a carbonyl group and with 2, which is attached to 2 carbon groups, where R and R dash are the carbon chains. Next is you have to add any substituents like methyl or chloro at the correct position on the parent chain. Okay, so the numbers in the name, they tell us exactly where these groups should go. Step 5 is that you have to complete the structure by adding the remaining hydrogen atoms. Okay, so you all know that carbon should have 4 bonds. So fill in the hydrogens wherever needed to satisfy this rule. Okay, so make sure you're following the steps to draw the chemical structures for the IUPAC names. Now first we will see for 3-methyl-butanol. Now if you see over here, first we will identify the parent chain. Okay, so the parent chain is butane over here. Butane means this main chain has 4 carbon atoms. And N at last shows that this is fully saturated, which means only single bonds are present between carbons. Okay, so a 4 carbon chain is the backbone, and here we have seen that this is a saturated compound. Next, we have to identify the functional group. So the suffix -ul, which is Al in butanol, it tells us that this compound is an aldehyde. Okay, so if I talk about aldehyde, they always have a CHO group which is attached at the end of the carbon chain. So a CHO group is a defining feature of an aldehyde, okay, and it is always present at the end of the chain. So it is important to remember that the CHO group is always assigned to the carbon number 1 in the parent chain. This means that the numbering starts from the end with the aldehyde group, okay, ensuring that the functional group gets the lowest possible number. Next, you have to write if any substituents are present. So here we are seeing 3-methyl. That means methyl group is at the third carbon of the main carbon chain or of the parent chain. So a methyl group is attached to the third carbon of the 4-carbon chain. Okay. So therefore, if we draw the structure of 3-methyl butanol, so this is the final structure of 3-methyl butanol. So you can see this is the aldehyde group, and on the third carbon a methyl group is attached. And we did numbering in such a way that this aldehyde group gets the least number, that is the first number. Okay, so this is the structure of 3-methyl butanol. Now we will see the next one, which is 4-chloropentane 2-on. So we have a parent chain which is pentane. Okay, so this means a molecule, if we see, has 5 carbon chain which is fully saturated. Okay, this means each carbon chain is connected by single bonds. Next, we will look at the functional group, which is 2-on. Okay, so this ending, that is ONE, this tells us that this is a ketone. Okay, so this means that a ketone group is attached to the second carbon in the chain. So this 2 over here represent that this ketone is attached to the second carbon in the chain. Okay. Next, so we have seen a ketone group is present. So a ketone is C double bond O, which is a carbonyl group which is bonded to 2 other carbons. So specifically, we have seen that the ketone group is specifically located at the second carbon of the parent chain. So when we draw the structure, we will put C double bond O group on carbon 2. Next, we will see the substituents. So we will see 4-chloro. Okay, that means a chloro group is attached at the 4th carbon of the longest chain. So finally, we will put all this together and we will see the structure of this compound. So if you will see, this is the final structure. Okay, that is on second position a ketone group is attached, and on the 4th carbon a chloro group is attached. So this is 4-chloropentane 2-on. Okay, so this is the final structure. Now let us move to the next question. You have to predict the products formed when a cyclohexane carbaldehyde, it reacts with the following reagents. Okay, that is PHMgBr and then H3O+. Now let us look at this answer of this particular question. So this reaction involves cyclohexane carbaldehyde with PHMgBr, which is a Grignard reagent, which is followed by the acidic workup. So first, let's outline the reaction scheme. So if you see over here, we have a cyclohexane carbaldehyde with phenyl magnesium bromide, which is followed by the addition of H3O+, and you will see a new carbon-carbon bond is also formed in this reaction. So this is a classic example of a nucleophilic addition to an aldehyde. Okay, so you'll see over here, when this cyclohexane carbaldehyde reacts with Grignard reagent, so you will see that the phenyl group from this PHMgBr, it adds to this carbonyl carbon of the aldehyde. So see over here, this pH groups get attached to this carbon of aldehyde. Okay, and after the acidic workup, you see you get an alcohol, that is cyclohexyl methanol. So the product, if you'll see, finally is cyclohexyl phenyl methanol. Okay, so this means that the phenyl group, it has attached to the carbon that was originally a part of an aldehyde group. Okay, and now that carbon is finally bonded to an OH group, which makes it an alcohol. So we will now see the mechanism that how this reaction is happening. So in the first step, there is nucleophilic addition. Okay, that means a nucleophile, which is an electron-rich species, it will attack an electrophile, which is an electron-deficient species. Now, I think you must be clearly knowing that what is acting as a nucleophile over here. So, phenyl magnesium bromide, it acts as a nucleophile. So, phenyl magnesium bromide or PHMgBr is a Grignard reagent. It is highly reactive and it seeks out the positive centers in the molecule. So, if you'll see over here, where is the positive center? So here it will target this carbonyl carbon of cyclohexane carbonaldehyde, because this carbon is partially positive. Now the nucleophile, it attacks the electrophilic carbonyl carbon. Okay, so this is because if you'll see that this carbonyl carbon is double bonded to this oxygen. So this oxygen, being more electronegative, has a partial negative charge, and this carbon has a partial positive charge, which makes this electron deficient and it is more susceptible to attack by nucleophiles like PHMgBr over here. So when the nucleophile attacks, the pi bond in the carbonyl group breaks. So if you'll see over here, when this nucleophile will attack this carbonyl carbon, the pi bond over here will break. Okay, so this double bond between the carbon and oxygen now becomes a single bond. If you'll see over here, between this carbon and this oxygen, so this is now a single bond over here. And oxygen picks up a negative charge, which forms an alkoxide intermediate. Next, as a result, you will see this carbon and this carbon bond is formed. Okay, so a new bond is formed between the a new carbon-carbon bond forms between the phenyl group and this original carbonyl carbon. And now this oxygen has a negative charge, which makes it as an alkoxide intermediate. Okay. Now we will see what happens in the next step. Now in the next step, you will see there will be protonation. Okay, so this is an acid-base reaction where the intermediate, which is formed in the previous step, it reacts with hydronium ion. Okay, so first in this part, H3O plus, it donates a proton to the oxygen atom of the alkoxide intermediate. So here you will see that this stabilizes the molecule. Next, the magnesium-oxygen bond, which is MgO bond, this breaks. Okay, and this is important because it separates the organic product from the magnesium-containing byproduct. Okay, so you will see that the magnesium and oxygen bond will break. So now you will see a new carbon-oxygen, which is a COH bond is formed. Okay, so this C and this OH bond is formed. So this is how you see we have a hydroxyl group which is attached. Okay, so the oxygen now this oxygen is now further bonded to hydrogen, which completes the transformation. Okay, so we'll see the final outcome of this product. So here there is formation of cyclohexyl methanol, and this compound has both a cyclohexyl and a phenyl group which is attached to the central carbon. Okay, along with an OH group. So this is how we have seen an example of how Grignard reagent, they can build more complex molecules. As a byproduct, magnesium bromide hydroxide, this is MgBrOH, is released. Okay, and this comes from the magnesium part of the Grignard reagent. So this was for this solution, that how we have predict the products when the cyclohexane carbonaldehyde reacts with this pH MgBr, which is further followed by the hydrolysis. Now we will move on to the next question. You have to give a simple chemical test to distinguish between the following pair of compounds. First is propanol and propanone. Next is acetophenone and benzophenone. Okay, so first propanol is an aldehyde and propanone is a ketone. But in second, both are ketone. So you have to give a test where you can distinguish an aldehyde and a ketone and where both are ketone. So if we see the solution part, so propanol and propanone. So it is important to remember that first is an aldehyde group and second is a ketone one. So one of the most important tests for aldehyde is a tolerance test, which is also called as silver mirror test. Okay, so this test is very specific for an aldehydes, which do not work for most of the ketones. So tolerance test it uses a special reagent that contains silver ions. So when an aldehyde is present, it reduces silver ions to metallic silver. Okay, and it forms a shiny mirror on the test tube. This is a clear indication of an aldehyde group which is present. Remember, ketones usually do not give this reaction. Now if we see how propanol reacts with tolerance reagent, so since propanol is an aldehyde, it will react and produce a silver mirror. So propanol reacts with tolerance reagent. So the aldehyde group in propanol, it reduces the silver ion to metallic silver, which appears as a mirror on inside of the test tube. And this is a classic positive result for the aldehydes. So if you see a silver mirror, you know that the compound is an aldehyde. So this confirms that propanol is present, not propanone. So if you look at this particular reaction, you will see propanol, which is CH3CH2OH over here, when it reacts with tolerance reagent to form propanate ion, metallic silver and ammonia. Okay, so if you see over here, the silver ions, which is Ag plus over here, they are reduced to silver metal, which is Ag, and this is what forms the mirror. Next, we will see reaction with propanone. Propanone, it is an ketone. Okay, so as I told you, ketones usually don't give this test. So when we add tolerance reagent to propanone, there is no formation of a silver mirror. Okay, so this is a key observation, that a silver mirror is a classic sign of an aldehyde. So the solution remains clear, which means no visible reaction has taken place. So this helps us confirm that propanone does not react with tolerance reagent, unlike aldehydes. Now this result tells us something quite important about ketones, that they cannot be easily oxidized by tolerance reagent. Okay, so only aldehydes are oxidized in this test, which is why the silver mirror forms with them and not with ketones. So if you look at the reaction, when a propanone, which is a ketone, it is mixed with Tollens reagent, there is no reaction. Okay, so this is a very simple and reliable way to distinguish between ketones from aldehydes. Now we will see the next part. Now we will see Felling's test. Okay, so Felling test works by using a special solution which is called Felling solution, which contains copper ions. So when an aldehyde is present, this solution reacts and forms a brick red precipitate. Okay, so the change in color is a strong indicator that an aldehyde group is in the compound, or an aldehyde group is present. So you will see that what happens when we test propanol, which is an aldehyde, with Felling solution. So when propanol is added to Felling solution, so you will see that propanol, it has an aldehyde group, which is a CHO group. So during this reaction, the copper ions in the solution, they are reduced from copper 2 to copper 1 oxide. At the same time, the aldehyde group in the propanol, it is oxidized to carboxylic acid. So if you see here carefully, this is a redox reaction where electrons are transferred between two substances. So as a result of this reaction, a brick red precipitate of copper 1 oxide forms. So this solid is easy to see, and it confirms that an aldehyde group is present in the sample. Okay, so if you see this color, you know you have an aldehyde. Next, if we see tested with propanone, which is a ketone. Okay, so you will see that no color change happen. So when a propanone, which is a ketone, is added to Felling solution, there is no reaction. Okay, so ketones, they do not have the reactive hydrogen atom next to this carbonyl group. So they do not react with Felling's reagent. So because there is no reaction, the solution stays blue and no red precipitate forms. So this negative results tells us that the compound is not an aldehyde. So it must be a ketone like propanone. Now we will see the next one, which is acetophenone and benzophenone. So this can be distinguished using iodoform test. Now what is this test about? So this helps us detect the presence of methyl ketones. Okay, that means that have a CH3 group which is attached to the carbonyl carbon. So the key observation is the formation of a yellow crystalline precipitate, which is called the iodoform. So to clarify, a methyl ketone is a molecule which is a C double bond O group directly attached to a CH3 group. Okay, so a methyl ketone is a molecule with a C double bond O group which is directly attached to CH3 group. So when such a group is present, the iodoform test produces a yellow solid which is easy to spot. So if we focus on acetophenone, then we will see that this acetophenone contains this methyl ketone group. Okay, so if you'll see that there is this carbonyl group, and adjacent to this carbonyl group, you have a methyl group. So this contains a methyl ketone. Okay. So because of this now, this will give us a positive iodoform test. That means it will produce a yellow precipitate of the iodoform, which is CHI3. So if you look at this particular reaction, when acetophenone reacts with sodium hypoiodide, which is NaOI, okay, you will see over here that a yellow precipitate of triiodomethane is being formed over here. Okay, that is a yellow PPT of this is formed, which confirms the presence of a methyl ketone. Now, if we talk about benzophenone, then in benzophenone, benzophenone is a ketone where both the groups they are attached to the carbonyl are phenyl rings, okay, which are just benzene rings. So benzophenone don't have a methyl group next to this carbonyl group. Instead, they have two phenyl groups, which makes it a diphenyl ketone. Okay. So because of this structure, benzophenone, it gives a negative iodoform test. Okay. So if you look at this reaction, when a benzophenone reacts with sodium hypoiodide, there is no yellow precipitate of triiodomethane, which is CHI3. Okay. So this negative results help us identify benzophenone, since only the compounds with a methyl group next to this carbonyl will give a positive iodoform test. So you will see, to summarize, the reason benzophenone fails the iodoform test is because both the groups which is attached to the carbonyl are phenyl rings and not the methyl groups. Okay, so this is the structural feature what differentiate it from acetophenone. Okay, students, thank you for your attention. I hope this lesson was helpful. Hope you all have a nice day.